The Xenobiology Lecture Hall on Titan Station was a marvel of galactic engineering. 700 seats arranged in a sweeping semicircle, each one equipped with personal data screens, translation matrices, and olfactory projectors that could replicate the scent of any known world. The ceiling was a curved dome that could simulate any sky in the known universe, though today it showed the familiar swirling orange of Titan's methane atmosphere. Professor Vexter stood at the center podium, his 6 spindly legs clicking against the polished floor as he adjusted his teaching apparatus. His species, the Aranthi, were renowned throughout the Galactic Federation as the premier xenobiologists. They had cataloged over 40,000 sentient species and countless more non-sentient life forms. Their memory was nearly perfect, their attention to detail legendary, and their patience. Well, that was tested daily by students from 100 different worlds. Today, Vexter announced, his mandibles clicking in the Aranthi equivalent of a throat clearing, we will be studying the apex predators of Class 3 worlds. This is perhaps the most important lecture of your academic careers. Understanding apex predators is not merely an academic exercise. It is a matter of survival for any species that wishes to expand beyond their home system. A murmur rippled through the lecture hall. Apex predators. The words carried weight in the Federation. Every species knew the terror of being hunted, the primal fear that lurked in the genetic memory of all sentient beings. Some had evolved beyond it, most had not. In the third row, a creature with 4 independently rotating eyes and skin like polished obsidian leaned forward. Professor, are we to study the howlers of Xylos? Patience, student A-Track, Vexter said, his third eye swiveling to focus on the questioner. We shall begin with a broader survey. What makes a creature an apex predator? Student Zarkath. A being that resembled a walking fern, its fronds quivering with attention, spoke up. An apex predator is a creature that has no natural predators in its ecosystem. It sits at the top of the food chain. Correct, but why is this significant? Vexter began to pace, his legs creating a rhythmic clicking that echoed through the silent hall. Because apex predators shape entire worlds. They determine which species thrive and which perish. They drive evolution itself. The great hunt that your species, he gestured vaguely toward the fern-like being, underwent to achieve sentience. That was the result of apex predators pushing your ancestors toward intelligence. The lecture hall fell silent. This was the grim reality of evolution in the galaxy. Most species had clawed their way to sentience through sheer terror, through the desperate need to outsmart something that wanted to eat them. And some worlds, Vexter continued, have apex predators of such terrifying capability that they shape not just the biology, but the very psychology of their sentient inhabitants. Today, we will examine the 5 most terrifying apex predators in the known galaxy. We will hear their roars. We will understand what it means to be prey. He paused, his compound eyes scanning the room. And then, after we have experienced the full measure of these horrors, we will discuss why your own homeworlds have produced the species they have. I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable. The human seat was noticeably different from the others, wider, with a different contour, designed to accommodate my bipedal frame. The other species in the room had seats shaped to their own anatomies. Some were pools of nutrient gel, others were harness-like arrangements that suspended their bodies in comfortable positions. I was the only human in the xenobiology program, the only human on Titan Station, really. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 28 years old, from a small town in Nebraska that no one in this room could pronounce, let alone locate on a map. I'd been in the Federation for 3 years now, ever since first contact, ever since humanity had stumbled into the galactic community like a confused child wandering into a room full of adults. We were the newcomers, the species that had achieved interstellar travel by accident, by building a warp drive that shouldn't have worked according to every known physical law. The species that didn't have a unified government still fought wars over imaginary lines on maps and had nearly destroyed our own biosphere multiple times. And we were terrified of everything. Or so the galaxy assumed. First, Vexter announced, raising a small data sphere, we shall hear the roar of the shadow stalkers of Andromeda 7. The lights dimmed, the ceiling shimmered, and suddenly we were looking down at a world of perpetual twilight, where massive purple trees towered above a carpet of bioluminescent fungi. And then the sound came. It started low, like the bass note of some impossible instrument, vibrating through the very bones of everyone in the room. The fern-like being, Zarkath, began to tremble, their fronds shaking violently. The obsidian-skinned student in the third row had all four eyes focused on something unseen, their body rigid with fear. The sound rose in pitch, becoming a shriek that clawed at the mind, that promised pain and death and the end of all things. It was a sound designed by evolution to paralyze prey, to make them freeze in place so that the hunter could close in for the kill. I felt my own heart rate increase, my fight-or-flight response activating despite my rational mind knowing this was just a recording. The sound was objectively terrifying. I could feel it in my chest, in my teeth, in the hair on my arms standing on end. And then it stopped. The lights came back up. The simulation faded. Several students were visibly shaken, their bioluminescence flickering erratically or their skin flush with stress hormones. The shadow stalker, Vexter said, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction, is considered one of the most terrifying predators in the galaxy. Its roar has been known to cause cardiac arrest in prey species with weaker constitutions. It hunts by inducing paralysis through sound, then consuming its prey while they are still conscious. He projected an image of the creature, a nightmare of too many legs, too many teeth, and eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. Second, he continued, the screaming wraith of the Serpent Nebula. This time the sound was different. It wasn't a roar, it was something worse. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the fear centers of the brain. It was the sound of a child crying for help mixed with the shriek of tearing metal, mixed with something that was almost like music, but wrong, deeply wrong. I saw the gelatinous being in the front row actually begin to dissolve slightly, their body having a stress response that threatened their structural integrity. The instructor quickly deployed a stabilizing field around them. The sound continued for an agonizing 30 seconds, then faded. The screaming wraith hunts through psychological warfare, Vexter explained. Its call triggers the deepest fears of any sentient being, making them vulnerable to attack. It is considered one of the most dangerous predators in existence because of its ability to adapt its call to any species. The students were shaken. Even the professors from the other departments who had come to observe this famous lecture were looking pale, their various equivalents of skin showing signs of stress. Third, Vexter announced, the mind-eater of the Zorn expanse. This one was different again. It wasn't a sound at all, not really. It was a feeling, a pressure in the mind, a sense of something vast and hungry and intelligent pressing against the edges of consciousness. Several students cried out, clutching their heads. The fern-like student actually crumpled to the floor, their fronds wilting. I felt it too, a cold presence brushing against my thoughts, probing, searching. It was the feeling of being watched by something that could see into your soul, that knew every secret you'd ever hidden, every fear you'd ever had. Enough, Vexter said, and the presence vanished. The lights came back up. There was a collective sigh of relief from the room. Students were checking themselves, reassuring each other, trying to shake off the lingering unease. The mind-eater does not roar, Vexter said. It communicates psychically, overwhelming its prey with terror so absolute that they simply give up. They stop fighting. They accept death. It is considered one of the most refined hunting techniques in the galaxy. He paused, letting the full weight of what he'd just shown sink in. Fourth, he said, the flesh render of the midnight world. The sound that filled the room was like nothing I'd ever heard. It was a screech, a howl, a shriek that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The lights flickered. The floor vibrated. The students who had been recovering from the previous demonstrations were plunged back into terror. And then came the image, a creature of pure darkness, of shifting shadows and impossible geometry, moving with a speed that made no sense, tearing through prey species that were themselves terrifying by any reasonable standard. The flesh render, Vexter said, is notable for its efficiency. It does not play with its food. It does not intimidate. It simply kills. Its roar is a warning, a declaration that death has arrived and there is nothing you can do to stop it. The room was deathly quiet. No one was looking at the professor anymore. Everyone was staring at the image of the flesh render, their various forms of fear responses playing out in real time. And fifth, Vexter said, the apex predator that many consider the most terrifying of all. The one that has shaped the evolution of the species that, until recently, we believed was the most warlike in the galaxy. I speak, of course, of the great devourer of the glimmering expanse. The sound that followed was indescribable. It was a roar that seemed to be made of 1,000 voices, 1,000,000 voices, all screaming in perfect harmony. It was the sound of entire worlds dying, of species being erased from existence, of hope itself being consumed. The simulation that accompanied it showed a creature so vast that it could swallow planets, so terrible that its mere presence drove lesser beings to madness. Its roar was the sound of the universe ending. I saw a student actually faint. Another was being treated by emergency medical drones. The gel-based student in the front row had turned a toxic shade of orange that, I later learned, was the equivalent of passing out from fear. The great devourer was renowned throughout the galaxy as the reason so many species had achieved sentience, not because it hunted them, but because its mere existence was so terrifying that they had evolved intelligence just to try and comprehend, and perhaps eventually defeat, such an impossible horror. Apex predators, Vexter said, his voice now taking on a tone of profound significance, are the crucibles in which sentience is forged. The fear they inspire drives evolution. The terror they create pushes species toward adaptation and the understanding of their existence. Well, that is what separates the intelligent from the merely clever. He paused, his compound eyes sweeping the room. Now, he said, we will study each of these predators in detail, their biology, their behavior, their role in their respective ecosystems. But first, I want to hear from you. Which of these predators would you consider the most terrifying? Which one instills the deepest fear? Speak honestly. There is no shame in fear. Fear is what has kept us alive as species. The room was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, the students began to speak. The great devourer, said a reptilian student in the back row. Its roar is the sound of extinction itself. The screaming wraith, said another. It uses our own minds against us. There is no defense against that. The shadow stalker, said a third. The paralysis, the helplessness, that is true terror. The discussion continued for several minutes, each student weighing in with their opinion, each one finding a different aspect of the predators to be the most frightening. And then finally, Vexter turned to me. Student Webb, he said, you have been unusually quiet. As the only representative of your species in this room, I am curious about your perspective. Which of these predators does humanity find the most terrifying? I looked around the room. 700 beings from 100 different species were looking at me. All of them had just experienced what the galaxy considered the 5 most terrifying sounds ever produced. All of them were still visibly shaken. I thought about the question. I thought about my childhood in Nebraska, about the animals I'd grown up around, about the things that had terrified me as a child. Professor, I said slowly, I think there's been a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? Vexter asked, his mandibles clicking with curiosity. These sounds, I said, gesturing at the data sphere, they're supposed to be terrifying, right? They're supposed to be the most frightening roars in the galaxy. Indeed, Vexter said. They have been verified by the Galactic Xenobiology Institute as the most terrifying auditory signals produced by any predator in known space. I nodded slowly. I see. And the great devourer's roar, that sound we just heard, that's supposed to be the most terrifying of all. According to our research, Vexter confirmed, it has been known to cause psychological damage in students who experience it unprepared. Why do you ask? I looked around the room again. 700 beings, all waiting for my answer. 700 beings who thought they'd just heard the most terrifying sounds in the universe. Professor, I said, I think you might have missed one. The room went very, very quiet. Excuse me, Vexter said. His mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. That was, I'd learned, the Aranthe equivalent of being stunned speechless. I said I think you missed one, I repeated. There's an apex predator on Earth that we should probably include in this discussion. Earth, Vexter repeated. Your homeworld. The Class 3 death world that somehow produced a sentient species capable of surviving its impossible gravity and crushing atmospheric pressure. And, Professor, I interrupted gently, I'm not talking about Earth's gravity. I'm talking about an animal. Vexter's compound eyes focused on me with intense interest. You mean to suggest that Earth has an apex predator whose roar is more terrifying than the great devourers? I mean to suggest, I said carefully, that you might want to hear what it sounds like before you make that judgment. The room erupted into murmuring. Students began talking to each other in rapid bursts, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sound. Silence, Vexter commanded, and the room fell quiet. Student Webb, I have studied Earth's biosphere extensively. I am aware of your planet's apex predators. The great cats, the ursine species, the canids, these are impressive creatures to be sure, but they are hardly comparable to. Professor, I said, with respect, have you ever heard a lion roar? Vexter's mandibles clicked once, twice. A lion, the large feline of the African savanna. Exactly, I said, the lion. I confess that I have not, Vexter said, but I fail to see how the roar of a mere feline could possibly compare to. Can I play it? I asked. I have a recording on my personal device. It's just something I keep with me, to remind me of home. Vexter hesitated. The other students were watching with intense curiosity. Some of them had probably never even heard of Earth, let alone its animals. Very well, Vexter said finally. I am curious to hear this, Lion, but I must warn you, Student Webb, that we have just experienced the 5 most terrifying roars in the known galaxy. If your lion does not measure up, your species will be seen as, how shall I put this, somewhat underwhelming in the realm of predators. I smiled. It was the smile that humans get when they know something that others don't, when they're about to reveal something that will change everything. I understand, Professor, I said, but I think you'll find that Earth's animals have a certain quality that other worlds lack. I spent a moment scrolling through my files. The recording was old, from a nature documentary I'd watched as a teenager. It was the sound of a male lion roaring in the African wilderness, captured by a BBC film crew at sunrise. The original recording was much longer, about 45 seconds of building roar, followed by a series of grunts and pants as the lion finished its call. But I'd edited it down to just the core sound, the part that made people's blood run cold even when they were watching it through a screen. Here it is, I said, holding up the device. But I should warn you, this is a real recording. It's not simulated. It's not enhanced. It's just what a lion sounds like when it roars. A real recording, Vexter repeated, from a real animal. And you think this will compare to the engineered psychological weapons of the great devourer? I think, I said slowly, that you should see for yourself. I looked around the room. The students were all leaning forward, their various forms of attention-focused body language on full display. Even the ones who had fainted earlier had been revived and were watching with intense curiosity. The professor gave a slight bow of his upper body, his mandibles clicking in what I'd come to recognize as agreement. Very well, Student Webb, play your recording. I activated the file. For a moment, nothing happened. There was only the soft hum of the lecture hall's environmental systems, the occasional clicking of Vexter's legs on the floor. And then the sound came. It started low, much lower than anyone in the room expected. The Shadow Stalker's roar had been low, yes, but this was different. This was a vibration that you felt in your chest before you heard it, that seemed to come from the ground itself. The bass frequencies of a lion's roar are incredibly low, so low that they're often felt rather than heard. The roar starts at around 50 hertz, which is near the lower limit of human hearing, and then builds from there. The students shifted in their seats. Some of them looked confused. The roar was building, but slowly and in a way that seemed almost patient. And then it rose in pitch. The roar swelled, filling the room with a sound that was simultaneously majestic and terrifying. It was a sound of power, of absolute dominion, of a creature that knew beyond any doubt that it was the most dangerous thing in its environment. It was a sound that said, "I am here and you are prey." The bass frequencies continued to vibrate through the room, shaking the seats, rattling the data screens, making the very floor feel as if it were trembling. And then the roar reached its peak. It was a sound that could only be described as overwhelming. It wasn't just loud, it was pervasive. It filled every corner of the room, every molecule of air, every fiber of being. It was the sound of something that had perfected the art of terror over millions of years of evolution. The students who had been shaken by the great devourer's roar were now frozen in place. The fern-like student had actually collapsed again, their fronds completely limp. The obsidian-skinned student had all four eyes wide open in what I could only describe as absolute horror. Even Vexter was affected. His legs had splayed slightly, and his mandibles were hanging open, unclicking, unworking. His compound eyes were fixed on my data device as if it were some kind of ancient artifact. The roar faded slowly, like a storm receding into the distance, and then it was over. For a long moment there was silence, absolute, complete silence. Not even the environmental system seemed to be making sound. Then someone in the back row began to emit a high-pitched squeal of distress. Another student began to vibrate violently, their body having a fear response that I'd never seen before. Medical drones descended from the ceiling, their lights flashing emergency patterns. The gelatinous being in the front row had turned a deep purple, which I later learned was the equivalent of having a heart attack. Vexter finally managed to close his mandibles. His legs seemed to be trembling slightly. "What?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Was that?" I looked around the room again. 700 beings, and every single one of them was staring at me with expressions ranging from terror to awe. "That," I said, "was a lion." "Lion," Vexter repeated. "That sound came from a lion, a mere animal, a non-sentient creature." "Yes," I said. "Well, technically they're sentient, but they're not sapient. They don't have language or culture or technology. They're just animals." "Animals," Vexter said, the word seeming to choke him. "That was an animal, a non-sentient animal." "Actually," I said, "lions are apex predators, at the top of the food chain. They're one of the most successful predators on Earth." Vexter was silent for a long moment. His mandibles were clicking rapidly, which I'd learned was the Aranthe equivalent of deep thought. "Student Webb," he said finally, "did you know about this? Did you know that your planet has predators whose roars are more terrifying than the Great Devourer?" I shrugged. "I mean, yeah, I grew up knowing about them. They're not really a big deal on Earth, though." "I mean, they're dangerous, but you just stay away from them." "Stay away from them," Vexter repeated. "That's what you said. Stay away from them, as if that's an option, as if the sound we just heard doesn't trigger every fear response in the known galaxy." I was starting to feel a little uncomfortable. The attention was getting to be too much. "Look, Professor," I said, "it's just a lion. They're not even the most dangerous predators on Earth. Bears are bigger. Crocodiles are more dangerous up close. And there are wolves, tigers, elephants, hippos." "Stop," Vexter said, holding up a forelimb. "You're telling me that Earth has more predators like this, creatures whose roars can induce cardiac arrest in sentient beings?" "I wouldn't say cardiac arrest," I said, "but yeah. There are a lot of animals on Earth that are pretty dangerous." The room erupted into chaos. Students began speaking all at once, their various forms of communication creating a wall of sound that was almost as overwhelming as the lion's roar. Questions were being shouted, theories proposed, arguments breaking out. Vexter raised his forelimbs for silence, and the room gradually quieted. "Student Webb," he said, "I think you need to explain something to us. Your species evolved on a world where creatures like this exist, creatures whose roars are more terrifying than anything we have in the known galaxy, and yet your species survived. How?" I thought about it for a moment. It was a good question, and one I'd never really considered before. "Professor," I said slowly, "I think we survived because we were even more terrifying." The room went silent again. "What do you mean?" Vexter asked. I looked around at the assembled students, at their alien forms and unfamiliar faces. "I mean," I said, "that humans evolved to hunt these animals. We chased them across the savannah until they collapsed from exhaustion. We threw spears at them from distances they couldn't reach. We set traps for them, poisoned their water sources, burned their habitats." I paused, letting the words sink in. "We became the apex predator on Earth," I continued. "Not because we were stronger or faster or had better claws and teeth, but because we were smarter. And because we were willing to do whatever it took to survive." The lecture hall was buzzing with tension as the medical drones finally withdrew, having stabilized the most severely affected students. Vexter was pacing back and forth across the podium, his legs clicking in a rapid rhythm that betrayed his agitation. The other professors who had been observing the lecture had gathered in a small cluster near the door, their various appendages waving as they spoke to each other in rapid whispers. I stood at my seat, feeling the weight of 700 pairs of eyes on me. Some of those eyes were species that could see through walls or detect thoughts or perceive emotions. The attention was intense. "Student Webb," Vexter said finally, "I need you to understand something. What you just played, that sound, it's not just any sound. It's the sound of something that has been perfected by evolution over millions of years to trigger fear responses in prey species." "I know," I said. "No, I don't think you do," Vexter said. "The Great Devourer's roar is designed to cause fear, yes, but it's engineered. It's artificial. It's the result of a creature that evolved to be terrifying, yes, but that creature is so massive, so powerful that it doesn't need to be terrifying. It just is." He paused, his mandibles clicking. "The lion's roar is different. It's focused. It's designed to instill fear in other creatures, to establish dominance, to make prey freeze. It's a psychological weapon, and it's more effective than anything we've ever encountered." I nodded slowly. "I guess I never really thought about it that way. It's just a lion to us. It's just another animal." "Just another animal," Vexter repeated. Student Webb, you said earlier that Earth has more animals like this. Can you tell me about them? I need to understand what we're dealing with. I thought for a moment. Well, there are tigers. They're similar to lions but bigger. Their roars aren't quite as deep, but they're still terrifying. Bigger, Vexter repeated. How much bigger? About 150 to 300 kilos, I said, depending on the species. Some can get up to 300 kilos. A student in the front row let out a sound of distress. I looked at them confused. What's wrong? Student Webb, Vexter said slowly, 150 to 300 kilos is the mass of a small shuttle. Are you telling me that Earth has land animals that large? I said, yeah. I mean, we have elephants that are even bigger. They can get up to 6,000 kilos. The room went very quiet again. 6,000 kilos, Vexter repeated, and they're predators. No, elephants are herbivores, I said. They eat plants, but they're still really dangerous if you get too close. They'll kill you. Herbivores, Vexter said, creatures that eat plants, and they'll kill you if you get too close. Absolutely, I said. If they feel threatened, they'll charge. They'll stomp you into the ground. They're one of the most dangerous animals on Earth. Vexter was silent for a long moment. His mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. Student Webb, he said, I need you to answer something honestly. How did your species survive? How did you become the dominant species on a planet with animals like these? I thought about it for a moment. It was a question I'd heard before, but never from someone who was genuinely confused by the answer. Professor, I said, we survived because we were the most dangerous thing on the planet. Not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we were the smartest. We could make tools, build shelters, cooperate in large groups. We could plan and strategize and adapt. I paused, thinking about my own history, my own ancestors. We hunted lions, I continued. We chased them across the savannah until they collapsed from exhaustion. We threw spears at them from distances they couldn't reach. We outsmarted them, and when we couldn't outsmart them, we outnumbered them. Vexter's compound eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. Your species, he said slowly, you were predators, not just in the sense of eating meat. You were predators in the sense that you actively hunted other creatures that were trying to eat you. Yes, I said, that's exactly right. We were prey too at first, but we figured out how to become predators, and once we did, there was nothing that could stop us. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a murmur began to spread through the students. They were talking about Earth, about humanity, about the species that had evolved on a planet with lions and tigers and elephants, and all the other horrors that the galaxy had never known. Professor, I said finally, I think we should get back to the lecture. There's a lot of material to cover and... Student Webb, Vexter interrupted, I think the lecture is over for today. I need to process this information. He looked at the other professors, who nodded in agreement. Class is dismissed, Vexter announced. We will reconvene tomorrow. Student Webb, please remain. The students began to file out, their various forms of locomotion taking them toward the exits. Many of them were still looking at me, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. I watched them go, feeling a strange sense of pride mixed with unease. I was the only human in the room, the only member of a species that had evolved to hunt the most terrifying predators in the known galaxy. And I had just changed everything they thought they knew. Student Webb, Vexter said, his voice low and serious, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. I nodded, of course, Professor. That sound you played, he said, that lion's roar, it's not just terrifying to us, it's primal. It's the sound of something that has been shaped by millions of years of evolution to be the most effective predator possible. I nodded, that's exactly what it is. Then you understand why I'm concerned, Vexter said. Your species evolved on a world where that creature existed. You hunted it. You defeated it. And now you're here among us in the galactic community." He paused, his mandibles clicking slowly. "Student Webb, do you understand what that means? Do you understand why the galaxy is afraid of humans?" I thought about it for a moment. It was something I'd been told before, but never quite understood. "Because we're dangerous?" I asked. "Because you don't know when to stop," Vexter said. "Because you're willing to fight things that should be impossible to fight. Because you look at the most terrifying predators in the universe and think, that would make a good pet." I laughed. It was a nervous laugh, one that came out before I could stop it. "Professor, we don't keep lions as pets. They're wild animals." "But you could," Vexter said. "You could keep one as a pet. That's what's terrifying. You could take the most terrifying creature in the known galaxy and make it your companion." I didn't have an answer for that. I'd been back in my quarters for maybe 3 hours when the first messages started coming in. My personal communicator was flooded with requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and academic inquiries. The headline on the Federation News Network read, "Terrifying Discovery. Earth's predators make great devourer sound like whimpering pup." I sat on my bed, staring at the screen, wondering how my life had gotten so complicated. My quarters on Titan Station were modest by galactic standards, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out on the swirling orange clouds of Titan's atmosphere. The walls were covered with pictures from Earth, the Nebraska cornfields where I'd grown up, the Rocky Mountains where I'd gone on vacation, the New York City skyline that had seemed impossibly tall when I first saw it. I'd come to the Federation to learn, to explore, to understand the universe that humanity had suddenly found itself a part of. I hadn't expected to become the center of a galaxy-wide controversy. A chime at my door signaled a visitor. "Come in," I said, not bothering to get up. The door slid open to reveal a being I didn't recognize. It was tall, probably 3 meters, with a body that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a tree. Its limbs were long and spindly, and its head was a complex cluster of sensory organs that seemed to be constantly scanning the room. "Marcus Webb," the being said. Its voice was a low, melodic rumble that seemed to come from its entire body. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Who's asking?" "My name is Xyler," the being said. "I'm a researcher for the Galactic Federation's Department of Xenobiology. I've been studying Earth's biosphere for the past year, and I have some questions." I sat up a little straighter. "Questions about what?" "About your lecture," Xyler said. "About that recording you played about Earth's predators." I nodded slowly. "I see. What do you want to know?" Xyler's sensory cluster twitched, and I got the impression that the being was trying to figure out how to frame the question. "Your species," Xyler said, "evolved on a planet with predators like that. Predators whose roars are more terrifying than anything in the known galaxy. And yet you survived. You became the dominant species." "Yes," I said, "that's what I told the class." "But you didn't tell them the whole story," Xyler said. "You didn't tell them how you really survived." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Xyler said, moving closer, "that you didn't just outsmart the predators. You didn't just hunt them. You did something else. Something that made your species truly unique." I was confused. "I don't know what you're talking about." Xyler's sensory cluster seemed to brighten, as if the being had found what it was looking for. "I've been studying Earth for a year," Xyler said, "and I've found something remarkable. Your species didn't just survive on that planet. You thrived. You domesticated the predators. You made them into companions. You took the most terrifying creatures on your world and turned them into friends." I blinked. "Wait, you mean dogs?" "Dogs," Xyler repeated. "Yes. Your species domesticated the gray wolf, a predator almost as terrifying as the lion, and you made it your companion." I couldn't help but laugh. Xyler, dogs are friendly. They're not terrifying anymore. Not to you, Xyler said, but to us. Your species has a track record that's hard to ignore. You domesticate predators. You make friends with them. You turn the most terrifying creatures in the galaxy into companions. I sighed. I think you're overthinking this. Dogs aren't lions. They're smaller and they've been bred for thousands of years to be friendly. And yet, Xyler said, you still have lions, you have tigers, you have bears, you haven't domesticated them, but you could. That's what's terrifying. Your species has the ability to domesticate anything, even us. I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not here to argue with you, Xyler continued. I'm here to ask a question. A question that will determine the future of human-Federation relations. What question? Xyler's sensory cluster seemed to pulse with intensity. What other predators does Earth have? What other creatures have you overcome? What other terrors are hiding on your world? I thought about it for a moment. There were a lot of them. Professor, I said slowly, I think you might want to sit down for this. Xyler's body language shifted in a way that I interpreted as confusion. What do you mean? Earth is a death world, I said. You already know that, but you don't know how many ways it can kill you. The predators are just the beginning. Xyler was silent for a moment. Tell me more, Xyler said finally. Okay, I said. But you asked for it. I began to list the dangers of Earth. There are snakes that kill you with a single bite. They have venom that stops your heart or breaks down your blood or paralyzes your nerves. There are spiders that can kill you in minutes. There are jellyfish that can kill you in seconds. There are plants that can kill you if you touch them or eat them. There are bacteria that can kill you in days. There are fungi that can kill you in weeks. Xyler's sensory cluster was pulsing rapidly, as if trying to process all this information. And I continued, there are the oceans. The oceans are full of things that can kill you. Sharks, jellyfish, sea snakes, octopuses that can tear you apart, even fish that can shock you to death. The oceans, Xyler repeated. The oceans cover 70% of your planet's surface, and they're full of things that can kill you. Yes, I said, and we swim in them for fun. Xyler made a sound that I couldn't identify. It might have been laughter. It might have been terror. Your species, Xyler said, swims in oceans full of things that can kill you, for fun. Recreationally, I said, it's a hobby. Xyler was silent for a long moment. Marcus Webb, Xyler said finally, I think I understand now. I think I understand why the galaxy is afraid of humans. Why? Because you don't know when to stop. Because you're willing to fight things that should be impossible to fight. Because you look at the most terrifying predators in the universe and think, that would make a good pet. I laughed. You're repeating yourself, Xyler. Because it bears repeating, Xyler said. Your species is terrifying, but not because of your strength or your intelligence. Because of your perspective. You look at the most terrifying things in the universe and see possibilities. I didn't have an answer for that. The Federation's news network ran non-stop coverage of Earth's predators, playing the lions roar over and over again. It became a cultural phenomenon. Beings from 100 different species would gather to watch the replay, their various forms of fear responses on full display. The footage went viral. Every species in the Federation wanted to see the human who had stood up in class and played the most terrifying sound in the galaxy as if it were nothing. I became something of a celebrity, not a comfortable celebrity, more like a creature in a zoo constantly being observed and analyzed. Everywhere I went on Titan Station, beings would stop and stare. Some would whisper. Others would approach me with questions. And then the Federation Council called. I stood in my quarters, dressed in the formal uniform that had been provided for me, a black jumpsuit with the Federation's insignia on the shoulder. The call was coming in through a holographic projector, and I could see the council members sitting around a massive table. There were 12 of them, representatives of the Federation's most powerful species. The Aranthi, of course, with their 6 legs and compound eyes. The Vri, a species of small, bird-like beings with feathers that changed color based on their emotions. The Chorus, a collective intelligence that spoke in perfect unison. The Mentari, beings of pure thought that communicated through mental projection. And more, dozens of beings from a dozen different worlds, all looking at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The council leader, a being called Vexter's Superior, spoke first. "Marcus Webb," the being said, "we have reviewed your lecture. We have reviewed the recording of the lion's roar. We have consulted with our experts and our scientists. We have determined that the Federation's perception of Earth has been incomplete." "Incomplete," I repeated. "Yes," the council leader said. "We believed that Earth was a death world. We understood that your species had achieved sentience through a difficult evolutionary journey, but we did not understand the full extent of your world's dangers." I nodded slowly. "I see, and what do you plan to do about it?" The council leader paused, exchanging looks with the other members. "We have decided," the leader said, "that Earth's predators must be studied. We need to understand what makes them so effective. We need to understand why your species evolved to face them. We need to understand everything." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What kind of study?" I asked carefully. "We will be sending a research team to Earth," the leader said. "They will study your planet's biosphere. They will capture specimens. They will conduct experiments." "No," I said. The room went very quiet. "I beg your pardon," the council leader said. "I said no," I repeated. "You can't do that. Earth's ecosystems are fragile. You can't just show up with a research team and start capturing animals and conducting experiments. There are laws about this. There are ethical considerations." The council leader's eyes narrowed. "Marcus Webb, Earth is part of the Federation now. You agreed to this when you joined." I felt a surge of anger that surprised me. "Earth is not a laboratory," I said. "Earth is my home. Those animals you want to study, they're not just specimens. They're part of an ecosystem that's been balanced for millions of years. You can't just show up and start taking them apart." The council leader was silent for a long moment. "Marcus Webb," the leader said finally, "you are the only human in the Federation, the only representative of your species. We value your perspective, but we cannot allow emotions to cloud the pursuit of knowledge." I took a deep breath. "You can't do this," I said. "Earth has laws about this. We have regulations about studying animals. You can't just show up and start experimenting." "The Federation," the council leader said, "has its own regulations, and they supersede any local laws. Earth is now part of the Federation, and we have jurisdiction." I felt a cold fear spread through me. "Please," I said, "don't do this. Earth's animals aren't just specimens. They're part of our heritage. They're part of who we are as a species." The council leader paused, exchanging looks with the other members. "Marcus Webb," the leader said, "we understand your concern. We will take it under consideration." And then the call ended. I stood in my quarters, staring at the empty space where the hologram had been, feeling a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. They were going to study Earth's animals. They were going to experiment on them. They were going to take them apart and figure out what made them tick. And there was nothing I could do to stop them.